Hello and welcome to Church at Home with Rachael. My name is Rachael Parker. My pronouns are she and her. I am an Anglican priest responsible for Dayspring Ministries, which is collaborating parishes of St. Mary's Edgerton, St. Saviour's Vermilion, and St. Thomas Wainwright in the beautiful province of Alberta for the Diocese of Edmonton in the Anglican Church of Canada. Thank you for joining me today. At the request and suggestion of one of the viewers from yesterday's video about mental health, I would like to talk a little bit more about that. And I think the question sort of came out of, is the whole chicken and the egg thing. Is mental health more talked about today because of COVID? Or did COVID create more mental health problems? Or are we talking about them more because COVID brought them more to our attention? So were they existing prior to COVID and we just didn't talk about them and COVID gave us permission to talk about them? Or did COVID the shutdowns actually create more mental health problems and hence we're talking more about them? And I want to hazard a guess and say both and. I think that the abrupt shutdown that most of the world saw in 2019 when the pandemic hit, especially in the beginnings of it, was so widespread and so far-reaching, including the whole, when you go to a grocery store, you have to stay 6 feet apart from people, and you can only go in so many people in a store at once. That we were for the first time really being told to be antisocial. People, we're taught from the time we're in kindergarten to learn how to share, learn how to play well together. All the lessons we learn in the sandbox and things like that. And they always seem to revolve around community and how we react and interact with other people, and really pushing us to have good manners and to be polite and to know how to have small talk and things like that. And all of a sudden, it seems almost overnight, we were shoved into this world in which it was frowned upon and even shunned to have a conversation with another person standing in line, because your droplets from your spittle might hit each other. We might infect one another. We were discouraged from doing anything that resembled any kind of socialization. Things that we had been telling ourselves and our children for years. We need to socialize. Our children need to be in school, and we need to learn how to interact with one another. And most of the lessons they learn will be the most important ones they learn in community. And all of a sudden, we are learning how to pivot, as they say, to online learning and Zoom and one-on-one, and parents who were never meant to be teachers teaching their children. And all of this without even being able to support each other in those endeavors. When I moved to Wainwright in 2020, in Alberta, the pandemic had not waned, but our political willingness to deal with it had waned, and we eased restrictions way too fast, and we found ourselves back into some pretty serious restrictions again. And one of the things I dealt with was the number of people who had moved into retirement or communities or nursing homes prior to or at the beginning of COVID, and who then were completely isolated because they weren't allowed to leave their rooms. Their families couldn't come and talk to them. Grandchildren standing outside a window and using their iPads just to FaceTime with their grandparent, or to open a window and speak through a window, or simply just to make snowmen and decorate them for grandma or grandpa, because they weren't allowed to be near these older folks who would be most susceptible if they got sick. During the pandemic, we discovered incredible reserves of strength, our ability to be independent, to be creative, to do new things. How many people learned how to make bread? How many people picked up crafting? How many people learned how to do stuff like this? Because they were forced into a position where they had to be singular. They had to be away from other people, away from those resources that we take for granted. But how many more people realized, even if they didn't really like being around other people in the first place, how many more people realized how absolutely essential community is to our individual mental health? I think for many, many people who were already struggling with mental health issues prior to the pandemic was in many ways a nail in the coffin. You couldn't get out to see your doctor. Those people who had opportunities to have groups, even support groups like AA or NA and things like that, that were those things that helped them to mentally deal with addictions or other psychological issues, those things were taken away from them. And well, yes, many, many people grew stronger and found reserves of strength within them they didn't know they had. I think probably there were untold numbers, sort of that the iceberg figure. When you see the tip of the iceberg, there's so much, 90% of the iceberg is below the water. You can't see it. How many people did we lose during the pandemic? Maybe not loss of life, but how many people lost their sense of who they were and are still struggling to find it again? How many people did we lose that maybe older people who just died of old age, but really they died of loneliness? How many people found themselves really struggling with a sense of what is my purpose once the doors were reopened and they were able to go back into the world? How many people found that they had fallen into a place where being out in the real world causes them anxiety? This is a real fear for people. It is a real need in our society that we recognize what happened during the pandemic. And I would argue the pandemic is not over. We may be into endemic times now, I'm not sure, but we are not post-COVID. I don't think we ever will be. But we need to learn how to deal with it. And I really do believe we need to beef up our mental health systems. Whether they are the formal ones like psychologists and psychiatrists or even general practitioners or our family doctors, that they would understand how important it is when we go in to have, to get our 3-month blood sugar check done. And we say to them, I'm feeling kind of down. The winter's already hit me. Do our doctors recognize, are they trained to recognize that those words aren't just simply me passing, chewing the fat while you're looking up my file on the computer? But maybe I'm actually saying to you, to the doctor, I am depressed. There's something wrong. I think that our medical system is so overwhelmed that there are probably many, many, many patients who go in to speak to their doctors and say something like that. And it just goes completely over the doctor's head. They're so busy worrying about everything else, or that here in Alberta, there's a sign on the door that says your doctor's appointment is for one issue only. If you have more than one issue, you need to book an extra appointment or more time. So when we already feel overwhelmed, how do we say to our doctor, I'm here because I have to have my 3-month blood work done and get my prescriptions updated or renewed. But I also need to talk to you about my mental health. And I have 30 seconds left in this appointment to do that. If you're like me, you're probably not going to say anything because you don't want to overwhelm the doctor, or maybe even more importantly, you don't want the doctor to just look at you and say, well, that's your problem. I don't think my doctor would say that, but that's a fear I have. It's an anxiety that I carry, is if I took the time to admit that I needed help, would the person I was admitting it to take the time to listen? I think that we need to do a better job in our society, wherever we are, of encouraging the powers that be, including places like churches and clubs, places where people hang out like legions, places where people come together intentionally for community. We need to do a better job at paying attention to the person who's right in front of us, not thinking about the answer to the question or the question we have of them that's going to come down, but actually sitting and listening to the words that are coming out of their mouth and the message that's coming across that isn't spoken in words, the body language, the affect. Is the person able to smile? Do they laugh? Are they seem distracted? Do they seem distracted? Do they need someone to listen? Do they need me to say, why don't we go over here in this quiet corner and have a coffee and just tell me how you're doing? We absolutely need our healthcare systems wherever we are in the world. Our healthcare systems can always do a better job. But in acknowledgement that we're not there yet, we can't simply say, well, too bad, so sad, can't help you. There's nothing available. We need to take responsibility. We need to step up and say, I can listen. I may not be able to fix your problems. I may not even understand what they are, but at least I can listen to you. And sometimes listening, face to face, one-on-one, is the greatest gift we can give another person. Whether COVID has taken away our ability to have strong mental health, to have healthy mental health or not, I don't know. But one thing that has come flying to the fore is that the pandemic made us more and more aware of the importance of mental health. And we cannot rely on the powers that be. We can't even rely on those people who are officially trained. We have to rely on one another. And the fact is, that's how things worked for centuries. Communities relying on communities. We need to strengthen our communities one person at a time, one group at a time, one church or legion or library at a time, that we can reach out to one another and help people know that they can feel safe and that they will be listened to. And we may not be able to help them directly, but maybe we can walk with them as we together try to figure out how we can find some help for them. Help is available. We just have to figure out where and how to access it. But we also have to encourage people to be able to say, I need help. So if you are needing help, again, I invite you, please reach out. Look around you in your neighborhood. Tell me, there might not be a lot I can do, but I can pray. And maybe that could be what you need. Or maybe hearing someone else's story. I don't know. But there is so much that we need to do for one another. We can't quit. We got to keep it up. Thanks for listening today. Have a good day. Take good care of yourself. Take some time for self-care. And God bless you, and I'll see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachael.